This is a First Coast Living special presentation. The TaxSlayer Gator Bowl, celebrating 80 games. Now, here's David Benfield.
Welcome to Everbank Stadium, home of the 2024 TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. Over the next half hour, we're going to celebrate 80 games of iconic moments. Plus, we'll tell you about how this game affects our community here in Jacksonville. And of course, we'll get you a preview of this year's matchup between Duke and Ole Miss. But what better way to start today's show than from the beginning? Rick Catlett, former president and CEO of Gator Bowl Sports, takes us back to the 1940s, where this all began.
Story goes that Maurice Cherry looked out his Main Street window after Christmas in 1944 and found Jacksonville extremely dull and lifeless, an observation that was neither unique or new. Since the turn of the century, Jacksonville business and civic leaders had sought ways to liven up the dead business and social season after the holidays. Mayor Alsep had already tried to begin a bowl game in the 1930s but was unsuccessful. In late October 1945, however, Maurice Cherry and a handful of businessmen decided to try football attraction again. The idea sputtered and stalled. Neither civic fever nor sporting zeal for the event were overwhelming, but a small group of businessmen persevered. The group invested their own money to bankroll the game. Now all they needed were two teams to play and 8,000 people in the stadium. An investor approached his friend P. Head Walker, the coach of Wake Forest, and as fate had it, South Carolina's athletic director happened to be finishing up his wartime enlistment at NAS Jax in December 1945. Both teams agreed to play in Jacksonville on New Year's Day, 1946. Unfortunately, only 7,362 were at the game. The backers took a bath. They regrouped, agreed to try it again, thank goodness. Not until the fourth game did they begin to see light, but by that point, the Gator Bowl tradition was well on its way.
All right, guys, I have the privilege of being joined by Mr. Greg McGarity. He is the current president and CEO of Gator Bowl Sports. Thank you so very much, sir, for spending some time with us. I know right now you are a very busy man. As you celebrate the 80th game, can you speak to the pride that the Gator Bowl has on being the sixth oldest bowl game?
Oh, yes. It tells so much about the history of our game. So many people have contributed to the success of this game. And you think of that going back to 1946. It's amazing. A lot of people have just been tremendous, and we're just very proud to be able to withstand so many difficulties during the bowl seasons to make it work out to be a great bowl experience.
It's a great bowl game. It's got a very, very rich history, and it also, it's got a community impact as well, right? So since the very first game, the mission has been economic impact. So does that really remain the case?
Absolutely. Data has shown through Visit Jacksonville that the economic impact of this game averages about $15 million a year.
Wow.
So that's a lot of revenue coming into the city for this week, this special week. And so we hope to maintain those numbers and make it even better.
Absolutely. So the college football landscape has changed considerably with the college football playoff. So how does that impact the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl?
Well, the number of teams that are playing this year in the college football playoff are the same number that were taken out last year with the New Year's Day 6 bowls. Okay. So the number of teams haven't really affected things, but it's allowed us to maybe have a better pick in the SEC since Texas and Oklahoma are now in the SEC and SMU in the ACC. So it's made our picks a little bit stronger. And with 2 9-win teams in the game this year, certainly bodes well for the prestige of the game and the success that these teams have had during the year.
Absolutely, absolutely. Duke and Ole Miss, it's going to be a great matchup. So what do you think the future of the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl looks like?
I think it's very promising, especially once you hit 2028 and beyond. So with the new stadium and all the amenities that it brings, certainly it'll elevate that experience and hopefully elevate the stature of the Gator Bowl game moving into the future.
Absolutely, a more attractive destination.
No question about it. Absolutely.
Greg, thank you so very much. I really appreciate your time. Let you get back to work. So we're going to continue to look at some highlights because there's decades and decades of memorable moments for the Gator Bowl. So let's check out some from the 1950s.
The 1950s brought new football teams to Jacksonville, including a West Coast contingent from Wyoming that sashayed into town with big white hats, fringed skirts, and prancing horses.
Jack Davis and John McLean at the Gator Bowl, New Year's Day 1951. Now, neither college has ever before appeared in a major bowl game, and this promises to be a battle royal between the West and the South. In
1953, the Gators made their first Gator Bowl appearance, which also ended up being the first ever bowl win for the Gators. Beginning in 1954, Auburn made its first of 3 consecutive Gator Bowl appearances, but only claimed victory once in all of those visits. Their first opponent in 1954 was Texas Tech. The Red Raider had become Texas Tech's official mascot and made its first football appearance at that year's Gator Bowl. A major historic milestone occurred in the 1954 Auburn versus Baylor game, as the Gator Bowl became the first bowl game ever telecast from coast to coast on CBS. As the game neared the end of its first full decade, the crowd topped 40,000 for the first time when Tennessee met Texas A&M, coached by Bear Bryant, the future Hall of Famer. The game was ironically marketed where touchdowns reign, but the score ended with a 3-0 score, and nobody scored a touchdown.
The TaxSlayer Gator Bowl, celebrating 80 games. We'll be right back. The TaxSlayer Gator Bowl, celebrating 80 games.
The 1960s proved to be full of what was to become legendary coaches and players. The first game of the new decade brought an Arkansas and Georgia Tech matchup that featured legendary coach Bobby Dodd and Frank Bortles.
Coached by Frank Broyles, who played and coached under Dodd at Georgia Tech.
It wasn't until the 20th Gator Bowl game in 1965 that the Seminoles came to Jacksonville for the first time to a crowd of over 50,000 people. During the game, Seminole quarterback Steve Tenzie threw for 5 touchdown passes, 4 of which went to gridiron soulmate Fred Biletnikoff in the Seminole victory.
Threads the needle again. A touchdown toss to Fred Biletnikoff.
The Syracuse Orangemen made their way to Jacksonville in 1966, featuring running backs Floyd Little, Larry Zonka, as well as future head coach of the Jaguars, Tom Coughlin. In 1968, future college football Hall of Fame coach Dan Devine of Missouri and Bear Bryant, now with Alabama, faced off with Missouri winning 35-10. Notably, Missouri completed 0 passes during the game, but rushed for 402 yards in the win.
In motion. 2nd and 15, Missouri at the 48. It proves a good call as McMillan gives to Cook on the draw. Cook rambles first down. The referee blows the ball.
The decade came to a close with a iconic matchup between Florida and Tennessee. The Vols, coached by Doug Dickey, were the SEC champions based on the regular season. But the Gators won the game, coached by Ray Graves, who coached his final game for the Gators. Immediately following the game, Coach Dickey was hired as the Gators' new head football coach.
And the 25th anniversary of the Gator Bowl Classic in Jacksonville, Florida, continues in their tradition of college football at its best.
The Gator Bowl charities are big supporters of the youth here on the First Coast, and so we have Katie Cox, the Vice President of Marketing, Memberships, and Community Relations, to tell us more. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
This is our pleasure. This is a great day. Very, very cool. So there is a large off-the-field component to Gator Bowl sports, right? So can you speak to what you guys are involved with off the field?
I think it's one of the most popular questions we get asked is, what do you do the rest of the year, right? You just work one day a year, right?
Yeah.
That is not the case. And so it's been about 10 years out of being formalized Gator Bowl charities as a nonprofit. We've always done a lot in giving back to the community, but at that point, we wanted to make it more known and start to talk about it more. So Gator Bowl Charities is focused on youth and service, and so we really try to leverage the power of sports to engage the youth and local community.
I dig it. Okay, let's talk about the mission and objective of Gator Bowl's charity.
Yeah, so I think when you have a unique event like ours where we run one major event a year, we also host the Florida State baseball game each spring. So there's technically 2, and so we looked at how important sports was to kids. We talked to a lot of kids, and what you hear, right, is I'm going to play in the NBA, I'm going to play in the NFL. That's not always a realistic goal. So how can we empower them to see the other side of the business of sports? And so we have looked at every opportunity we have, both in our house, so TaxSlayer Gator Bowl game and Florida State baseball, but also with community partners to say, how can we get these kids engaged?
What's the benefit of serving as a Gator Bowl member?
Yeah, so I think the 2 things probably not known about us the most are what we do in the community, and also we're membership based. And so if you watch the game, when you watch the game on January 2nd, you'll see a lot of individuals in green jackets. They're all community members who are engaged year round in our organization. And that's really how we tie the beauty of sports to the community. So for those individuals, they get to be behind the scenes, We talk to sports professionals throughout the year. A lot of them will be on the field on game day, helping with game operations. We have a core of volunteers that are with the teams while they're here the entire week. And then we carry them into the community to help serve our community programs, which range from bringing kids to the game to working with Dreams Come True. We pass bags of food. So as you keep your eyes on the week the teams are here, you'll see a lot of that marriage of community service and football.
That's great. It's so impactful around the community. I love that. So what does the future look like for memberships and charities?
So membership, we started, I think we're probably most popular right now for our ladies group, the Bold Ladies, BOWL''D. So playing on the name of the game, the Bold Ladies is growing very, very rapidly. The more people we can get involved, the better it is and easier for us to engage the community. And so I think we heard, and you guys heard from Greg, like the goal is to be in that CFP conversation. And to do so, what we heard as our directive was get the community involved.
That's awesome, Katie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You do so much for the community. I thank you very, very much.
We appreciate it.
All right, so let's take a look at some more of the history of the Gator Bowl with some highlights. Check it out.
The 1970s provided some of the most iconic moments in Gator Bowl history. 1971 was host to 2 Gator Bowl games. In the 26th annual game, more than 71,000 fans attended an unpredictable game of head-knocking SEC football. Auburn quarterback and Heisman Trophy winner Pat Sullivan and Ole Miss quarterback and Heisman runner-up Archie Manning slung passes in a high-scoring game. It was a game to remember. Ole Miss All-American Archie Manning played the game with a broken arm. He suffered in the final game of the regular season. To conclude the year, the 27th annual Gator Bowl featured Georgia versus North Carolina, fondly named the Dooley Bowl, as it featured head coaches Vince Dooley of Georgia facing off against his brother, head coach Bill Dooley, in a game chaired by longtime supporter W.W. Gay. In 1978, brought Clemson and Ohio State and more than 72,000 fans to Jacksonville. It also brought one of the most storied moments in college football history, a punch that ended the 35-year coaching career of Coach Woody Hayes from Ohio State.
The TaxSlayer Gator Bowl celebrating 80 games will return right after this. The TaxSlayer Gator Bowl celebrating 80 games.
The early 1980s presented one of the most memorable games in Gator Bowl football history, the first Fog Bowl. North Carolina and Arkansas took the field in front of more than 71,000 fans in a nail-biter. North Carolina head coach Dick Crum faced off against the Razorback coach Lou Holtz in a game that was played in fog so dense that players' numbers were hardly recognizable. 1983 was a shock as Florida fans faced Iowa in the coldest game in Gator Bowl history. It was 19 degrees at kickoff. The game was played during an uncommon streak of cold weather in North Florida. It had been so cold in Jacksonville that the stadium pipes, which were not insulated, had burst 1 week prior to the game, and there was no water in the stadium on game day. The 42nd game marked the first time the Gator Bowl had invited a Pac-10 team, Stanford, to Jacksonville. The game was a sellout. Legendary coaches Danny Ford and Jack Elway coached an incredible game that ended in a Clemson victory. New Year's Day 1989 brought a Georgia versus Michigan State game that marked the conclusion of the iconic coaching career of Coach Vince Dooley. Coincidentally, the Gator Bowl was also the site of Coach Dooley's final game as a player 34 years before.
The goal ever so close. Marino goes right away to the air. Collier the target.
American caliber football, Herb Gaynor broke open in the end zone for this perfect aerial act.
Welcome back to Everbank Stadium, home of the 2024 TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. The 80th matchup promises to be a great one. First Coast News Sports Director Chris Porter will get you all ready for the matchup between Duke and Ole Miss.
Are you ready for some college football here in the 904? Well, it's going down Saturday, January 2nd at Everbank Stadium. I'm talking about the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. And let's take a closer look at the two teams that will be squaring off here in the River City. And we'll start with the boys from the ACC, the Duke Blue Devils. Duke has a chance to win 10 games in its debut season under head coach Manny Diaz. The Blue Devils ended their regular season with a walk-off win over Wake Forest. They are bowl eligible for the third straight season. Duke has won each of its last 5 appearances in bowl games, including back-to-back seasons. Blue Devils have relied on a strong defense that allowed an average of a little more than 22 points per game this season, second best in the ACC. Their opponent, a squad from the SEC, the Ole Miss Rebels. The Rebels, at one point this season, believed and had a shot to be a part of the college football playoff. However, a Week 13 road loss to the Florida Gators knocked the Rebels out of the playoff picture. The Rebels have one of the best and most talented rosters in the country, but that does not always translate to bowl success. Lane Kiffin's Rebels are after their third 10-win season in 5 years. Let's hear from both coaches.
You play to win the game, right? And you play to try to maximize all your player strengths, and you have to do what's necessary to try to move the ball against a highly disruptive defense. So, that our coaches will get that dialed in over the course of the next few days, and we'll have a chance to run through our preparation twice.
I think that says a lot about this team in an age where that isn't the case a lot of times. I think that says a lot about this team and how close they are, and it also says about how they feel about the Gator Bowl and, playing a really good Duke team.
So it should be a good one between Ole Miss and Duke, and the First Coast sports team will have you covered.
The 1990s opened with the Gator Bowl on New Year's Day, featuring a game that has proven to remain one of the most lopsided victories in Gator Bowl history, Michigan versus Mississippi. In November of 1993, Jackson was officially awarded the Jacksonville Jaguars, which made the 49th Gator Bowl the last in the old stadium. More than 68,000 fans filled the stadium as Mack Brown's Tar Heels faced off against Gene Stallings' Crimson Tide, the defending national champion. With the new stadium being constructed, the 50th annual Gator Bowl game headed to Ben Hill Griffin Stadium at the University of Florida for a matchup between the Tennessee Volunteers and the Virginia Tech Hokies. Tennessee came out victorious behind freshman quarterback Peyton Manning and senior halfback James Stewart.
The TaxSlayer Gator Bowl, celebrating 80 games, will be right back. The TaxSlayer Gator Bowl, celebrating 80 games.
The millennium was celebrated as Miami defeated Georgia Tech in a game that would feature future NFL stars Clinton Portis, Ken Dorsey, Reggie Wayne, and Nate Webster. The 2003 Gator Bowl showcased a matchup between Notre Dame and NC State. The game also boasted the first female chairman in Gator Bowl history, Susan Hamilton. On the field, first-year head coach Tyrone Willingham and the Irish faced off against NC State, led by quarterback Phillip Rivers. The Wolfpack prevailed in a lopsided 28-6 win. The 60th game brought a familiar matchup to town, FSU versus West Virginia. Current Gator Bowl member James Coleman scored on the final scoring drive by the Seminoles for an FSU win.
Duke and Ole Miss are set to take the field January 2nd at 7:30 p.m. right here at Everbank Stadium. Now, if you want to catch all the action of the 80th Gator Bowl game, you still can get some tickets. Just head over to TaxSlayerGatorBowl.com. Okay, as we close out the show today, we're going to show you the last 2 decades of iconic moments that happened right here on this field. Thanks for joining us.
The dawn of a new decade provided an opportunity for the Gator Bowl and Jacksonville to say farewell to Florida State coach Bobby Bowden, as the Seminoles faced off against his former team, the West Virginia Mountaineers. The game will boast the record for largest attendance, with 84,129 fans in attendance. Coach Bowden loved playing in Jacksonville. He was undefeated at the Gator Bowl. 2012 brought a familiar rivalry to the newly entitled TaxSlayer Gator Bowl, Ohio State versus Florida. Will Muschamp led the Florida Gators to a 24-17 win over Ohio State. Luke Fickell served as the interim head coach for OSU after Jim Tressel resigned. OSU then hired Florida coach Urban Meyer in a bowl game billed as the Urban Meyer Bowl. The 73rd game brought Heisman Trophy winner Lamar Jackson and the Louisville Cardinals to a matchup against Mississippi State. In the end, the Bulldogs were victorious. The current decade has proven to be that of a roller coaster ride for the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. The 75th game was celebrated in January 2020 to an incredible crowd of Hoosier and Volunteer fans. The game was electric as Tennessee scored 2 touchdowns in a 30-second span to take the lead. A missed field goal by Indiana with 2 minutes left secured the victory for the Vols. The January 2021 game between NC State and Kentucky were played in front of a reduced capacity crowd due to COVID-19. The Wildcats sealed their first Gator Bowl win ever. TaxSlayer Gator Bowl returned to a normal crowd size for the 77th game in December 2021. Wake Forest Texas A&M game never materialized, as A&M withdrew from the game due to COVID. Following consultation with the NCAA, ACC, SEC, and Big Ten, Rutgers was named the replacement a mere days before kickoff, and the game went on as planned. The 78th TaxSlayer Gator Bowl returned with a game for the ages. Before a crowd of 67,383, Notre Dame defeated South Carolina 45-38 in one of the most memorable games in bowl history. In a back-and-forth battle between nationally ranked teams and a TV audience of 5.7 million people, Tyler Buckner Irish outdueled Spencer Rattler's Gamecocks, which included a 100-yard interception return by South Carolina's O'Donnell Fortune, a record that had been held since the first game in 1946. Last year in a record-setting game, Coach Swinney and Clemson defeated Kentucky 38-35. The two teams combined for 42 points in the fourth quarter as Clemson's Phil Maffa ran for 4 touchdowns, including the game-clinching TD with only 17 seconds left. As we reflect on a storied 79 games in Gator Bowl history, we look forward to adding the 80th chapter this January.